Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich talks with community leaders about issues in the public safety arena. Sponsored by River Ridge Hardware.
Good morning, folks. This is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich with the Sheriff's Report. A few weeks ago, I conducted a press conference based on a story that the Huffington Post did that was picked up by the local media. And a week or so ago, Sean Vestal from the Spokesman Review kind of took me to task on it. And it really kind of amazed me about that, because as I told Sean when I talked to him after reading the story, Sean, I don't know what you don't understand about the dynamics behind that press conference. I didn't want to do that press conference, but I had to because local media had picked it up. As a matter of fact, I didn't address the issue when it happened the Thursday prior to the press conference. It was almost 4 days before I did anything on that because I really didn't want to. However, because of what was put in the media, I found myself again having to step up and address a myth that was being set in the minds of the citizens. It's the same myth it's been kind of set in the minds of the citizens almost since the riot on May 31st happened. And that is that Antifa has nothing to do with this. And I found it amazing about Sean's story in that he says, I arrogantly or angrily stated that the reason or who had committed or led instigated the riots. Trying to remember his exact phrasing. And no, as I told him, I said, Sean, I made it very clear to everybody who was responsible, because this was a Black Lives Matter protest. And I didn't want that message diluted by the damage done by those who hijacked that protest. So I made it very clear to the citizens of Spokane County that our African American community did not do that. Did not do that riot. They did not promote that riot. As a matter of fact, that same morning of the riot, I also called Curtis Robinson, the president of the NAACP, and said, Curtis, by all accounts, we're hearing that this is going to go badly. And he said, I know. I'm trying my best. I'm trying to talk these people not out of doing what they're talking about doing. The day after the riot, I called Curtis and he said, Sheriff, I did my best. So our African American community tried to stop the instigators, and they couldn't. Because those instigators don't really care about the Black Lives Matter humanity part of it. They care about political agendas. And this is where the politics blends into it. Some people want to chastise me because, oh, he's making it political. No, this is political. I can't separate it. I can't fix it. I can't get away from it. It is politically motivated. It's an ideology that is driving these riots. And I wish the press would quit using the term mostly peaceful protest. There's no such thing as a mostly peaceful protest. It was either peaceful or it wasn't. And they all, at least from what I've seen, we get very lucky at times here in Spokane because they have tried to instigate several others, but they just can't get the numbers to do it. We're fortunate that we're not Portland. We're not all these other places, that these protests are not peaceful. And it's even devolving to a worse form of ugly. When two Los Angeles police or deputy sheriffs Los Angeles County deputy sheriffs, were shot, ambush style, taken to the hospital. You had Black Lives Matter protesters come to that hospital, try to get into that hospital, chanting, "We hope they die." We have devolved as a society. And all I can say is congratulations to the media. Congratulations to several politicians, national, state level, would-be leaders. Because this story that Huffington Post basically is a narrative. Oh, America, don't pay attention over here. There's nothing going on. Well, there is something going on. And Antifa does exist. And we're going to talk about that because now I've had several people ask me to go back through that PowerPoint and talk to the citizens about exactly the why behind the PowerPoint and the press conference, and to cover it a little bit, I guess, more in depth. So with that in mind, the first slide is a cover for the Huffington Post, where this reporter basically took the title that Mr. Logan posted on his Facebook as the title for his story, which for our radio folks states, Spokane protester, I was abducted by unidentified officers and put in an unmarked van. Then it goes a little bit deeper, right under that title. Next slide. It says, the arrest of Jeremy Logan, co-chair of the Democratic Socialists of America chapter, appears to have been politically motivated. And there you go, folks. From the outset, this reporter turned it political. As I said, I cannot escape the political nature of this story. They set it up that way. This isn't your sheriff leaning left, right, because I don't. You've seen me take on the extreme right. You've seen me take on the extreme left. You can go back through the database of the sheriff's reports and you can find where I talked about the danger of the extreme right and the danger of the white supremacist context within our region. It's there. Go do your research. Just dig back through the files. I did a 3-part series on the dangers of white supremacy in this region. I've done 3 town halls on the dangers of the extreme right, white supremacists, and the extremists of domestic or international terrorists and the left. So I pretty much am an equal opportunity offender to both the left and the right. I will take on any side that affects your safety. I don't care who they are. When it comes down to the safety of you, your families, your abilities to live your life without the harassment of somebody coming into your restaurant and demanding that you raise a fist, I take that very seriously. But that's what's happening in our nation right now. And the media refuses to cover what is actually going on. You have Black Lives Matter and Antifa going into neighborhoods now, demanding that people give their houses up. This is a snapshot of what it looks like if this element ever came into power in the United States. Chaz, CHOP, whatever you want to call it over in Seattle, was your snapshot. This is what it looks like. Lawlessness. You think you're going to be going back and forth to work in peace? Here's another thing. What happens if they are successful and they do have their little revolution? Do you think life's going to be the same for you? Do you think your 9 to 5 routine is going to be the same? No. Life is drastically different. But these are the elements that are out there. And again, we have devolved to the point that we go to hospitals now chanting that we hope a fellow human dies. We are killing ourselves in the street. We have Americans killing Americans in the street right now because of this false narrative. And it is a false narrative. And in few weeks after this program runs, I'm going to outline exactly the falseness of the narrative. So this reporter, I had an individual contact me through Twitter, and he posted this on my one of my posts to back to the reporter, Mr. Mathis. He said, Chris Mathis is an Antifa LARPer. Now, I had to go look that one up. I have to admit it. A LARPer, what's a LARPer? It's somebody that likes to dress up and play a role. And he said he likes to blend in with the Antifa, and when he gets in too deep, he pulls out his credentials and whines about the freedom of the press. See his whiny tweets from New York. So Sean took me to task on that one, and he said, well, that could be a bot. I don't know. All I know is the guy posted on my Twitter feed. And yesterday I had a meeting with a group, and one of the people in the group, because in Sean's little article on me, said I no longer listen to the public. Apparently because I'm not running for election, I don't have to listen to anybody. And I just kind of asked Sean, I said, well, what about this landmark agreement I signed with the NAACP to open up my agency to a cultural audit? And that's who I was talking to yesterday. Was the NAACP and an alphabet list of stakeholders attached. And one of those stakeholders said that they want to ensure that we're not being infiltrated by white supremacists and white nationalists and things like that. And all I could think was, where have you been? Because he even mentioned that he has gone to my town halls. He had seen my town halls, and he actually, I'll give him credit that he actually praised the town halls. But if he went to those town halls, how did he miss this fact? And it's this fact. Next slide shows when the Order, which is a white supremacist group, and their leader came to Spokane, they were confronted by our citizens. This is 1980s. What I found about Spokane does not tolerate racism. We don't. And the thing is, all those people that I met with, you know, I've never seen them once at any of the places I've been when I've had to take on and denounce white supremacy. When I was out in Millwood helping the mayor of Millwood clean up KKK flyers one Saturday morning that had been plastered all over his town. And that's why I really have trouble with activists. They'll come to meetings, but when the really rubber hits the road, I've never seen them. Very few of them. There were maybe one or two in that group that I have worked side by side with. And this whole notion about us being infiltrated by the other side, the white supremacists and all this, is now a national talking point with the media. And, you know, folks, the next slide we have is a group that has connections here, and we work to put these people in prison. White supremacist group. Mr. Butler, he was in our area. He spawned a lot of hate that spawned the Phineas priesthood, another white supremacy group that we work to put in prison. These folks These are white supremacists. And for the radio folks, I'm showing slides of white supremacists that we've actually investigated and put in prison because of the bad things they wanted to do in our community. We did that. Your law enforcement did that. Again, these are white supremacists. The next slide is a slide of Kevin Harper, a white supremacist who put a bomb on the streets of Spokane on MLK Day in 2011. I was in that march. I was with those folks. We had about 500 to 1,000 kids with us. We put him in prison. So you tell me about your law enforcement wanting to associate with that when we're putting them in prison. And I really find it disturbing. You know, some people say, Sheriff, you're looking a little angry anymore. Sean mentioned that I was angry during the press conference. Yeah, I am. I'm not going to deny that. I am angry. I'm angry how one incident painted an entire profession. I'm angry about all the things that are being said about good people. I'm angry about a nation that says we have freedom of speech, but if you actually speak your mind, you are canceled. All these activists, I've heard it time and time again, we need to have a courageous conversation. Problem is they don't want to have that conversation. And Lord knows we can't have that conversation because anything that comes out of my mouth that is counter to their agenda, and I'm a racist. I'm a white supremacist. I don't care. I'm hostile. No, they like to say that they're speaking truth to power. No, I'm speaking truth to activists. Because just because you're speaking something doesn't make it true. And we'll cover that in a few weeks. About the truth. We're going to use something that apparently is a bad thing anymore, logic. Facts. But I want to remind the citizens of this community that your law enforcement puts these people in prison. As a matter of fact, there are several of us that have paid the price on that at a very personal level with death threats. And no, I will never tell you about that because I'm not going to publicize it any deeper than that. But I think you need to understand that there comes a price with putting certain people away. And we pay that price. Gladly pay that price. So people like these do not harm your community, our community. During this little back and forth, I had several people from the media claiming to be journalists email me giving their support to ISIS or to Antifa. Kind of where I view them, they're at the same level. One said, hey, I have some intelligence for you, Sheriff, about ISIS or Antifa. Now I got ISIS in my mind. I'm not going to be able to get it out. So he says that Antifa effing rock. Okay. So I said, hey, give me a call. He said, no, unfortunately, I have a real job. If you're not in law enforcement, you're not going to understand the dynamic and the impact of that last statement because for 30 years, people who don't necessarily like law enforcement or they want to disparage law enforcement get a real job. I've heard that 30 years. Get a real job. Matter of fact, I had a family member once tell me that, and I just looked at them and went, you know, job feels pretty real when people die in your arms, when you have a baby die in your arms. Job becomes very, very real at that point. So this isn't just, when I mentioned that, there's feeling behind those words. There's impact behind those words. Words do matter. And the words that he was saying is, you don't have a real job. As a matter of fact, some of these people have emailed me, said, one, I should probably just kill myself or go away, or get a real job because I don't have one. But that's just a snapshot of what these people truly think about law enforcement. And you think they're going to be unbiased in the reporting on law enforcement? So I thanked him for the optic that was going to provide. And he sends me back this next slide, which is a meme of SpongeBob. And it says, well, you proved 1 point, true journalism is truly done. And I was like, okay. I went, okay, this is a journalist that writes supposedly for the Washington Post and Boston Globe, I think it was. I was dumbfounded that I was getting this type of email from journalists. And Sean took issue with the fact that I called this out. Well, I think it needs to be called out, because how can you say you're not biased and you do non-biased reporting when you are clearly show the biased and you're willing to, flaunt that directly? So the Huffington Post starts their narrative on this arrest, stating that Logan says the officers never identified themselves. Folks, it's absolutely not true. 2 of the deputies were wearing their vests, their outer vests, fully marked, names, everything. One of the detectives had his badge hanging on his shirt. They identified who they were. And yes, they did put him in an unmarked van and drove him away. And why did they do that? Well, there was a crowd starting to form, and rather than take the risk of having an issue, they just put him in a car and drove him away. In a few minutes, we're going to talk about what happened in Oregon and in New York concerning the same type of situation, because they'll bring it back up, and I'll explain why those tactics are used. So the officers, the deputies, did drive Mr. Logan a couple of blocks, met with the SPD patrolman, put him in a marked patrol car, and he was arrested and taken to jail on his warrant. And the Huffington Post says that, RPIO, Corporal Gregory, said that Mr. Logan had made public statements threatening towards law enforcement. However, he didn't elaborate. Well, that's because Mark didn't know all the details concerning that. And the Huffington Post wasn't willing to wait for us to give them all the details. We basically, it was their timeline, and we were told to get ready. It's our timeline, not yours. Well, that's what happens when you don't want to wait for the facts. You get to write what you did. We didn't elaborate. Well, that's because Mark wasn't there. He had to talk to the detectives, find out what happened, and it did make this reporter's deadline. Logan also laughed at a question about, Corporal Gregory's comment saying, I've been really critical, but I've never made a threat of any kind. Well, we'll talk about that threat a little bit deeper here. The Huffington Post went on to say that Corporal Gregory didn't answer questions as to why the sheriff's office suddenly needed to arrest Logan on a warrant that was old, about 7 years, and why we did it when he was heading down to a protest. Well, we'll cover that here in a few minutes too. And the reason Corporal Gregory didn't get that information is the same as I told you before. He told the reporter, "Hey, I've got to do some digging," and that reporter wasn't willing to wait. He had no intentions of waiting. So the Huffington Post goes on to state that a quote that I gave them, and I did give them this quote, folks, because I've kind of had to deal with the Huffington Post once before. At least this time they contacted us before they defamed us. And I said, quote, "I know it's difficult for the Huffington Post to understand the rule of law. They seem to have forgotten we are a country of laws. They also have forgotten their duty to our country to provide unbiased factual reporting per the protections provided by the Constitution of the United States." And that's the way I feel about it. That's not anger. That's just an honest, the way I see it. You've heard me on this program time and time again state that, contrary to popular belief, I am not anti-press. Actually, I believe our founding fathers were 100% spot on by giving them constitutional protections, because a republic has to have a free press. But that free press has to do the one thing: they have to live up to that protection, that right that they have been given. They have a very special right. And they have to live up to that right to make sure that their reporting is non-biased, that it is fact-based. Their role is to provide us with facts so we can decide, not for them to give their opinions. And that's what is driving every story anymore, is opinion. Folks, this is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich with the Sheriff Report. This is one of 2 programs we're doing on this subject. We'll see you next week with part 2.
Here at River Ridge Hardware Garden Center, where we have all the plants and flowers that will spruce up your yard, from the lilacs for Spokane's Lilac City to awesome hanging baskets and pots that you can actually put the hanging baskets in. Here at River Ridge Hardware, we want to help you set up your landscape needs. Neighbors helping neighbors at River Ridge Hardware.
Thanks for watching. Ask the host a question, recommend a guest, or check out any of our other programs on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Sponsored by River Ridge Hardware.